It's Sunday, June 23, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today taught general psychotherapy and treatment of borderline personality disorder to many generations of psychiatric residents at Johns Hopkins University Medical School in Baltimore. He's been a practicing psychotherapist for 35 years and now co-hosts a podcast entitled Shrinking Trump. Dr. John Gartner, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So first, let's talk about, obviously we're going to get into the weeds and analysis of Donald Trump and his mind, which some say, well, that won't take long, but there's quite a lot of depth there. I do recognize that the media and the national conversation is starting to wake up to Donald Trump's mental decline and mental health. And as far as I've been aware, that subject has always been off the table. Not for people like you and I. We're always working on this and analyzing and discussing, but the media and people generally, they just don't want to go there. Why do you think it's changed?
Well, I think it hasn't changed as much as it needs to. I understand that what you're saying about it starting to leach into the mainstream media, but I'll point out it's mostly from columnists. People like Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post, people like Eugene Robinson, they're starting to talk about it because they have a little bit of autonomy, a little bubble of autonomy within the mainstream media. You still are not seeing it in the front page of the Washington Post. You're not seeing it in the New York Times. And what we did see in the Wall Street Journal this week was one of the most atrocious and damaging hit pieces that you can possibly imagine. If your readers aren't aware of it, it's called Behind Closed Doors, Biden is losing it or something like that. And it's this big expose of how behind closed doors, Biden is sort of demented, basically. Yet they only interviewed, for the most part, Republicans. And also they have Kevin McCarthy saying he's not the same man he was 4 years ago, echoing the very same words that many Trump loyalists who were in the Trump White House have said about Trump, that he's not the same man he was 4 years ago because he has dementia. Dementia is a deteriorating illness. And his rate of deterioration is now accelerating. So now, of course, he's not the same man, but because they project everything, they have to have Kevin McCarthy come out and say he's not the same man, even though he's been quoted on record recently saying he's sharp as a tack. Okay, so it's a hit piece, but it had influence.
Let's deal with the elephant in the room, because yes, we know about where corporate media is owned, and of course there is always an onus, and owners of these media companies, they tend to pick a side, and we know about Murdoch and the ownership of various newspapers and all that stuff. So that's true, but the elephant in the room is Joe Biden. So just explain to people the difference between Joe Biden's deterioration as an elderly man versus Donald Trump's deterioration, both as someone with dementia, but also with multiple personality disorders.
No, I'm really glad you asked that question, because that really is the $64,000 question. The worst thing that's happening is that they are pathologizing the signs of normal aging in Biden, and at the same time, they're normalizing the flagrant signs of dementia and personality disorder and madness in Trump. So it's a dual-edged lie. It's a double lie. But the elephant in the room, as you say, is that actually I've been quoted as saying this is a tale of two brains. Biden's brain is normally aging and Trump's brain is dementing. Well, one of my colleagues decided to literally put that statement to the experimental test. He got speeches that both men made in middle age, and he compared them to current speeches. And he judged them on two sets of variables. One set of variables were signs of normal aging. The other were signs of dementia. Well, neither man showed either signs of anything when they were young. And actually, Biden showed more signs of normal aging than Trump. But Biden showed no signs of dementia, and Trump was through the roof on signs of dementia. So what are the signs of normal aging? Things like talking more softly, talking more slowly, moving more slowly. I don't know. I'm an impulsive person. And actually, now that I'm getting old, it's good that I'm talking a little more slowly and moving a little more slowly. Doesn't mean that I'm not competent enough to be a guest on your show.
I appreciate that. But as I see it, there is a difference between dementia and being a dictator. And having dementia is not going to make you a kind of dangerous despot where you take away women's rights and human rights and internment camps and all of this crazy stuff that Trump has planned. And so from that perspective, just talk to me about the difference between, which side of his diagnosis is the despot and which side is the dementia, because again, people might be confusing Biden and Trump's brain, but we've also got two aspects to Donald Trump's brain to consider.
No, that's absolutely right. When we first started Duty to Warn, the main message was to warn people that Trump was a malignant narcissist. And people need to understand, and this is actually what got me into this movement. You mentioned my expertise in personality disorders. I feel a little bit like that character, Dr. Mindy in Don't Look Up, who's just a nerdy scientist, but just because of his area of expertise happens to be the first one to see that there's a planet-killing meteor heading towards Earth. I studied with a famous person in the area of personality disorders, someone named Otto Kernberg, when I did my postdoc at Cornell. But he was the most famous person in the world in this obscure historical footnote of a diagnosis called malignant narcissism. I mean, nobody had ever heard of it unless you were in a small coterie of psychoanalysts. And it certainly wasn't in the DSM. But the significance of it historically is that it was introduced by Erich Fromm, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, as a way of explaining specifically the psychology of Hitler, from whom he fled. So he was literally trying to come up with some kind of psychological type that would explain Hitler. Okay. And obviously he understood Hitler to be of a type, so if it explained Hitler, it would explain other mad, murderous, grandiose dictators, etc. Well, because I trained with this one guy, okay, and who knew about this one thing, when I saw Trump and wait a minute, he's not just a jerk or, a narcissist. He's the real thing. He's got the Hitler personality disorder. And that meant I had to warn them. I mean, what would you do if you were Randall Mindy, right? You have to warn the public.
But why can't people, because there's a lot of pushback about the Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin comparisons. Not from me, but I recognize that it's almost like people can't comprehend. In their mind, they're like, well, Hitler killed 6 million Jews and the Holocaust, and how can you compare Donald Trump to that? So just explain to people why it's important to reference the dictators from history and where the similarities lie.
Right. It's really the similarities we're talking about. On the dictator scale, we can give Hitler 100, but 85 is still pretty bad. And so I think the point is we don't want to live in a country that's high on the dictator scale, even if it's not the worst dictator in history. But if you look at Trump's, if anyone looks at Trump's 2025 plan, okay, he's actually outlining the pure dictator playbook. The first thing is he's going to arrest the Bidens. Next, he's going to arrest all of his political opponents and the Democrats and the J6 people. Then he's going to arrest journalists. This is in the New York Times. Okay, you can give a link to this. Then they're going to purge all of the military, State Department, blah blah blah, of these woke people. Then they're going to remove all civil service protections so that they can basically every civil servant serves the will of the president. They're going to take over the power of the purse. And so basically the other thing they're going to do is mass deportation of immigrants and building camps. Okay, now let me explain. The definition of a concentration camp is not a death camp. That's worse. The definition of a concentration camp is a camp where you concentrate an undesirable population in an incarcerated environment. The Japanese internment camp would be an example. Okay. Even when he was president, he built out enough space for 250,000 immigrants. He wanted to put them in camps. And now, if he were to seize power, I always say immigrants are the new Jews, okay? If Trump is the American Hitler, then immigrants are his Jews. They have no rights. Okay. And he demonizes them more than any other group. He was saying in Nevada, he said, those immigrants, they're turning. They've turned at an amazing rate. They've turned. They're destroying our families. They're destroying the Black community. What does that mean? They've turned. I have this weird thing. I'm a freak for zombie movies and shows. I actually have watched them all. So you know what it means when someone turns, right? They're not human anymore, and you have to kill them to survive. That's how he's portraying these immigrants. Okay. So, I was arguing with a friend and he was saying, oh, you can't say Trump is the American Hitler. He's not as bad Hitler. I said, well, do you think he would be if he could? If he had the power, would he? Well, actually, he might. So in other words, this is what he wants to do. He was talking about wanting to execute people at will in his speech.
That's right, shooting people in the legs at the southern border, and he's come up with a whole range of things because during his first tenure he had people around him that could hold him back. And I suppose this is the differential, isn't it? That he's worked out that without a John Kelly or a James Mattis or people that are military people who know good from bad, right from wrong, that by surrounding himself with sycophants, that there won't be any protections this time. And that's what will make it different.
It's unbelievable at every layer, everything you said. And then if you look at his 2025 plan, right, it's to remove every check and balance systematically, literally layer by layer, phyllo dough layer by phyllo dough. We always thought the checks and balances of the American system was invincible, invulnerable. How would you break through, this deadlock and this interest group and this institution and these people over here? He's literally sweeping them all away, so that there literally will be no one in the world who can say no to him. And then if he's also demented, who the fuck knows what he's going to do?
So just so people are aware, this is the Heritage Foundation document called Project 2025. It's around 900 pages. You can download it. They're not being shy about it. It's on their website. They're recruiting 10,000 Trump people to put into these kind of civil service roles because they want to have loyalists throughout the federal government and basically reshape the federal government in Donald Trump's image. And there's a whole bunch of wealthy individuals who are behind this and business people. And there's around 30 or 40 advocacy groups that are, Christian nationalist groups that are part of this. And because Donald Trump, I suppose, doesn't really care for policy, he'll just take whatever he's given in the same way he'll just read what's on the prompt, like Ron Burgundy. This is a convenient kind of policy package for him.
Well, it's worse than that. He doesn't just read what's given to him. He always has to be dominant. He always has to know more about everything. There's that funny clip where he says, "I know more about nuclear power than nuclear physics. I know more," and he just literally goes to 100 different professions where he knows more about. And then they ask him who's his favorite advisor. He says, "Myself." So he always does something contrary and destructive and extreme and almost something so hideously evil as to almost dare you to do something about it. And so I think people, in one sense, it might be the weekend at Bernie's White House because he'll be so demented. People have been wheeling him around and stealing money from the Treasury right and left. My gosh, there'll be like a bazaar outside the White House where they're selling secret documents to the Russians and the Saudis, but he wants to do something extreme and shocking that's gonna upend everybody's world. He likes to create chaos. So imagine someone with unlimited power, with no restraint, with a malevolent desire to turn the world upside down.
He wanted military parades, didn't he? He wanted to show off America's might in a very kind of authoritarian fashion, and he was prevented from doing that.
He wants to be the president of North Korea.
Yeah. I mean, it's like all of our friends, all of our foes he has made friends with, and he doesn't seem to have any relationship with anybody who is a friend. And there's famously all those pictures of him in Europe and at the G8 summit and just being so vile towards Angela Merkel and people who were, very much, I mean, for goodness sake.
He's a Russian asset. He's a Russian asset. He's always been a Russian asset. In the game of chess, we thought we had won the Cold War. Well, they just took the king.
Yeah. Does he know? I was going to come on to Russia later, but we'll do it just because you mention it. Does he know he's a Russian asset?
Yes.
So which bit does he know about? Is it because I agree with you completely, but does he know that they've been manipulating him for 25 years? Or does he just think that by befriending Putin and saying, I'd rather take Putin's word for it than the security services?
Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. It's a crime family. It's a crime family. Okay, he's the big boss. He's the big boss. Okay, but I have America. That's my territory. Okay? Can I explain it to you any simpler than that?
It's very interesting. I mean, I actually rewatched that clip of him at Helsinki with Putin on the stage, and just from a body language perspective, and the fact that he was quite happy to come out and say that I trust Putin more than I trust the United States. He even named the people that had warned him about Russia meddling in the election, and still said it. When things like that happen, which are so blatant,
I know,
and so clear,
I know.
How is it? And this is more of a political conversation or question. But how does America qualify the fact that is even allowed? That it didn't stop then. That he wasn't arrested that night.
No, exactly. I mean, here it is. We've been fighting the Cold War with Russia in this incredibly paranoid way. It's like, God forbid, when you were 18 and, stoned, a girlfriend dragged you to some, communist meeting, these people are blatantly working for Russia. It's on television. If we had a 3-hour show, right, we could go over all the data points. You're just hitting the highlights. Where's the intelligence community that's supposed to be protecting us from espionage? Where are they? I mean, the espionage, if you have a television and an internet connection, you can see it, and they've got a lot more, fancy toys than that. I hate to say it, but Christopher Wray, and this is one of the things I really do fault Biden for, where he has been asleep at the switch. Is it an accident that Christopher Wray is a member of the Federalist Society, the society that's taken over the entire judiciary, the society that blesses every one of these judges that comes through? It's the secret. It's part of the vast right-wing conspiracy. He's the one that cleared Kavanaugh without an investigation. And we know that he resisted searching Mar-a-Lago for months. There was this behind-the-scenes fight between Jack Smith, and he just didn't want to do it. And then when he finally did it, they still left about half the papers because I guess he didn't really do it very carefully. He's working for them. That's the only explanation, the only thing that explains the facts.
He also recommended to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to go after Trump after January 6th. Which is why it's taken 3 odd years to actually, get close to that, and still hasn't happened yet. So this is an inside job.
The Russians also have the Queen. They have the head of the FBI. I just want to show you the pieces on the chessboard they've already taken.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And nothing is what it seems, except it is, because
it's exactly
Donald Trump says all the.
That's what's so crazy making about it.
He says all the quiet parts out loud. So let's just go before we kind of get into Trump's, because I want to go a little deeper with Donald Trump and his childhood and how it's kind of affected him now.
Yeah.
But I just want to finish up with the Joe Biden conversation, because it's very important. A lot of people watching this, especially people who are in the cult of Trump, will be watching this and they'll be saying, well, look at Biden. He does this, he forgets that, he walks in the wrong direction, he's all that stuff. And the way I qualify it is that, one is a dictator, but the other is a delegator. And I see Joe Biden as somebody who has changed a lot over the years in terms of being, I think, the guy's a Catholic and yet he's advocating for women's rights. It's like he can overcome his personal views for the good of the nation, it seems. And, just to have somebody who is a good person, a public servant in the White House, whether you care for their politics or not, it seems to me at this crossroads in American political history that people, if they want to live in this country as it is currently, then they need to go for Joe Biden, who is not offering to destruct the federal government and bring down the judiciary and go after all of his opponents.
You know, I couldn't agree more with everything you said, but I mean, it's just so hilarious that we're at this point. It's like, you know, if you really think about it, if you had to choose between Satan and and a decent guy doing his best and doing a decent job, you know, there's a lot of ageism in these attacks on Biden. You know,
right.
The point is that, you know, it reminds me of my grandfather. Okay. My grandfather was an eye surgeon and the mandatory retirement age was 65. Okay. And so they hit 65. They said, well, Sam, you know, you're going to have to hang it up. And he said, well, and this is back in the 70s. Okay. There was no ageism thing then. That wasn't a thing. You know, ageism meant you're fired at 65, get out of here. Yeah. But he said, look, I'll stop operating when my success statistics fall below the top 10% in this hospital. Says, judge me by my performance, not by my age. You know, I'm kicking your butts. Basically, he didn't say that. That's how I would say it, but you know, he was a gentleman. But they let him operate for like another 7 years. My point being is that Biden is doing a good job. Okay, I don't want to say that he's doing a good job by most accounts. People who have talked to him about policy say he's very on top of things, that he does understand this. You're right. He's a delegator. He's got a lot of people informing him, educating him, providing him with information, and he's got good judgment. And by the way, this is really where ageism is off base. You know, a lot of societies revere their elders because they believe that their elders have accumulated wisdom and they are correct. And, you know, by the fact that we devalue and degrade our elders, we're actually putting our society in danger because, you know, those hip young people with their phones don't always know everything just because they can query Google. Okay. There's a lot more to be learned in life when you've been around the block and seen a few things. And so everyone does say about Biden that he does have wisdom, that he does have judgment, exactly what Trump never had and now has less of, because one of the things that his brain is eating away with Alzheimer's, you know, that gives you less judgment. But the point is, these are different types of intelligences. So they're called fluid intelligences versus crystallized intelligences in the field of cognitive psychology. Fluid intelligence is like, okay, let's do something, some mind game. I have to remember numbers, and you'll probably beat me because you're younger, you know. But crystallized intelligence is intelligence you've distilled down, right, over all the years of experience. And that has enormous value. And so the point is that this whole devaluation of Biden, and I hear it everywhere, even from people that are on our side. They're like, yo, listen, of course, but you know, it just, you know, he fell off his bike. And it's like, you know, fuck you. Everyone falls off their bike. If you do ride a bike, then you've fallen off your bike.
Yeah, just not on camera. Let's just talk about. I mean, if Donald Trump was here, he'd say, "Well, I did the test. Man, person, woman, camera, TV, and I passed the test, and that proves that there's nothing wrong with me." Just answer that. I know it's a stupid question. I apologize, but I'm just.
Oh, don't get me started.
Trying to make the point.
Don't get me started on the mocha. Well, first of all, I'm going to brag a little bit. Donald Trump took the mocha because of us. I was working with Tom Steyer, give him some credit, with a publicity kind of group. And they said, you know what, why don't you guys write a letter requesting that they give him a cognitive screening, because we've written an op-ed about all these traits of dementia he was showing even then. And then because they had this publicity, like we sent that letter, we got like 100 doctors to sign it. We sent that letter to like 10,000 news outlets, and it became a thing. You know, doctors demanding. So he took it like to prove, like, you know, that, but he's never gotten over it. It does give me first of all, a little satisfaction that it still bothers him that much that he never stops talking about it. Of course, he lies outrageously about it, but the way he lies is so humorous because, of course, he always turns everything into its opposite extreme. So he always says, like, you know, you guys couldn't even pass that test. It was like the doctors couldn't believe it. It was like they'd never seen a score like that. Like it was a Mensa test. You know, if somebody is administering the mocha to you, it means they have a serious concern that you are showing massive, you know, a level. Actually, I have had neurologists a neuropsychiatrist explain this because it's not my field. I don't give people mochas, but they do. And they say, usually by the time we're giving someone the mocha, we're really asking ourselves the question, can they live independently? It's a very low level of screening. You know what I mean? So you can have an immense amount of cognitive deterioration before you hit the ground, where you actually fail the mocha. Any kindergartner can pass the mocha. It's like, can you point out the lion? And so I was like, and I couldn't believe how well I did. Well, you were so great at pointing out the lion. But the other aspect of it is Ronnie Jackson. I just have to, as a doctor to doctor, just speak of what a disgrace Ronnie Jackson is. We know he lied up and down all about his physicals. That he didn't have heart disease when he did, gave him this North Korean sort of praise. Oh, he's such a great leader. He's got the incredible genes. He could live to be 200, but also he basically lied about the cognitive test, about, again, kind of supporting Trump's view. Well, at a recent fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, I saw this piece of tape where Trump was saying, on that test, I had to divide 7,258 by 900. And oh my God, none of you could have done it. And and everyone's laughing and clapping. And then the camera pans over and there's Ronnie Jackson looking like he's some kind of hootenanny, going like, yeah, knowing damn well he's just lying through his teeth about the test that he as a doctor administered. I don't know. Just my contempt for Ronnie Jackson. I just like to always, mention Candyman Jackson, as we call him.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's the other controversy, isn't it? The amount of pills that were being consumed by Trump's White House, and apparently he was the guy making the deliveries. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about young Trump and how his childhood might have made the man that we see today. That's next here on The Weekend Show. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath, and on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you a tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does. Optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. So, if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/weekend to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/weekend for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. We're back with Dr. John Gartner here on The Weekend Show. So let's get into the psychoanalyst chair just for a second. Before I ask you about Trump's childhood, could you just tell me or speak to the people who say you can't diagnose Trump, you've never done a session with him, you've never sat in a room with him, there's no way you can do that, it's unethical. Just talk to that, because I think that's obviously an important place to start.
Yeah. You're referring to the Goldwater rule, which, to be honest, was quite obscure until this Trump controversy arose. So I actually had a chance to interview the last living member of the ethics committee that wrote the Goldwater rule. And he said if he were doing it today, he wouldn't write it. And I'll explain why in a minute. But let me just give you the historical context and why it's called the Goldwater rule. So this now defunct magazine called Fact published some article saying 1,000 psychiatrists were surveyed, and they said Goldwater was unstable. And they kind of cherry pick quotes. It wasn't really a well-written article, but some of them were very clearly irresponsible, unsupported statements. This is the 60s now, when psychoanalysis kind of ruled the roost, and psychoanalysis has given us many wonderful things in the field, but it also had some theories that turned out not to be true. And so they would say things like, well, he was scarred by his potty training, or he was a latent homosexual, or he hated his mother, and that was his reverse Oedipal complex. And people were speculating, and so he sued the magazine. First of all, he lost the election, and actually in part did lose the election, not particularly because of that obscure article, but because Johnson picked up the message that Goldwater was unstable. If you remember the Daisy commercial, with the most powerful political ad ever shown and only shown once, and people credit it with Johnson winning because it made Goldwater. Do you know the Daisy commercial? It's the one where the little girl. Oh, okay. Well, so a little girl is pulling a daisy off. Well, yeah, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. And then all of a sudden, maybe he will. And then you see a mushroom cloud. And it goes, Goldwater, we just can't take a chance. So meaning that he would be a shaky hand on the nuclear button.
On the nuclear button, yeah.
And as it turns out, Goldwater was actually not unstable. He was, he really wasn't. Witnessed the fact that he came to Nixon and told him to resign because for good reason, But he sued the magazine. He was mad. He sued the magazine, and he won $75,000. But the APA was embarrassed that the psychiatrists have been quoted, so they instituted this rule that you should not diagnose a public figure if you haven't interviewed him, and don't have his permission. Then something changed in our field, though. We adopted the DSM. This was in 1980. The DSM says that its aim is that all diagnoses should be based on observable behavioral criteria. So we're not speculating about what's happening in his Oedipus complex. Yeah, if I haven't had him in therapy, what do I know about his Oedipus complex? You know what I mean? But so that's wild speculating. But if the criteria for antisocial personality disorder are number one, and this is lying. Okay. Well, have I observed Donald Trump lying? I mean, the Washington Post has documented him, right, as the most documented liar in recorded human history. I think that's
it's around 37,000 lies or something.
Yeah, and counting, and now I think they're not even counting anymore. So because that's all he does is lie. I mean, we just have to. The scribes would never stop, recording. But so the point is, can we check that box? Violating the rights of others. You've sexually assaulted dozens of women. You've bankrupted people with your bogus business. Yes, you violate the rights of others. Breaking laws and norms. Yeah, these are things that are so observable, right? Not only do we not need to interview him, you don't need to be a psychologist. Just read the damn book. There's only like 9 criteria. You know what I mean? And they're all that observable and obvious.
In addition, I guess, to the fact that he is the most photographed person on the planet after Princess Diana. And so everything he says, everywhere he goes, every speech is all documented. It's all published, including, come to the Capitol, I'll go with you, and if you don't fight, you're not going to have a country anymore. I mean, everything he said, from bringing about a coup against his own country to the stuff that he said in private, like or Rex Tillerson calling him a moron, and us reading about this stuff, and all those amazing books that have been written about him as well, where, journalists have spent time with him because Trump's ego has been like, yeah, come and hang out with me, and doesn't realize that they're effectively going to expose his inner workings.
No, you put your finger on 2 very important things. I always say I've observed more of Donald Trump's behavior than all of my patients put together,
right?
In terms of quantity of hours. And you put your finger on another important point about the validity of our ability to diagnose him is that in real psychiatric practice, we actually do put a lot of weight on what we call informant interviews. Mm-hmm. In other words, if somebody knows the subject well, a parent, a child, a friend, we really want to hear what they have to say. And what you're saying is, with all these biographies and interviews, we've got dozens of informants.
Well, the Michael Wolff books are a perfect example.
Books, right, exactly. Yeah. Where really many of his crimes and symptoms and cognitive deterioration are all there documented in black and white. And really, actually, it turns out the clinical interview is actually not the gold standard. Okay, the Goldwater rule was written in 1964. Is not the gold standard of how to assess a patient. We've done studies like comparing, let's say, just observing someone or just getting informant reports or doing a clinical interview. And you know what the least reliable way is to establish a diagnosis? A clinical interview.
Yeah. Well, it's like observing children when you're testing them for autism or something. You watch them, you see how they play, you see how they interact, and it's no different. I was just thinking, John, that that Daisy commercial would do very well coming back now and being an ad for the Democrats referring to Donald Trump and his desire to
That's
blow
$1 million
the planet up.
idea. I'm going to suggest it to him.
Right. There you go. It's all up here. Okay, so let's go. Let's go back in time, because Trump just celebrated, or didn't celebrate, he refused to celebrate his 78th birthday. We should remind people that he is now just, 2.5 years behind Joe Biden in terms of age. Obviously, they're aging differently. I've said before, and this might be offensive to some people, and I apologize, but when you're skinny, you seem to age worse, like you look older, right? Because Donald Trump is filled out. He kind of looks younger, but I personally believe him to be much less mobile than Joe Biden. He certainly can't ride a bike, but he also swings one leg as well, which I've noticed recently, like he's dragging a leg. And I'm very interested in the physicality of these people.
That's a neurological sign of dementia, by the way. They call it a wide-base gait. That's a real tell. And I only learned this by talking to ultra specialists, and they zero in on that. Like, that is sort of a specific telltale sign of frontotemporal dementia.
So let's go back to his childhood. I mean, he had a very different childhood to you or I, or probably anybody. I mean, he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, to put it lightly. We know that he was given a large sum of money by his father, and a lot of financial analysts have said that if he'd have been a good investor, he could have turned that money into a huge pot, and really hasn't. Now he can't even afford to pay his court fines. So just tell me how you observe his childhood and how you think it plays into the man that we see today.
Yeah, in one of our shows on Shrinking Trump, we had Justin Frank, who wrote a psychobiography of Trump. So reading his book, I really learned a lot, filled in a lot of gaps in my memory, in my knowledge. I think the first thing that's really important is how cold his mother was. Justin Frank makes a big deal about this basic lack of love that he felt from his mother, because there is something sort of soulless about Trump. Right. He really is impossible to like. You can adore him or worship him or whatever, but you can't. He's unlikable. I mean, he really has no friends. He's incapable of being loved or loving. So that's really that early maternal bond is so crucial. In developing that capacity to love and feel loved. Okay, and so it's like he's starting off with this sort of deficit. You know what I mean? Of truly loving no one. You know what I mean? It's very profound. Then what you have is his father. He really comes from a crime family. I think people need to understand that. Just to take one step back before I talk about his father, I just want to talk about his grandfather, because we always say with Trump, everything's projection or confession. He's always talking about, these immigrants, they're not sending their best. They're criminals, the illegals. Well, I just want you to know that his grandfather illegally immigrated to America. So there's that. And second of all, he was a criminal. And his entire time here, he practiced crime. And actually, the nature of his crime is sort of interesting when you think about what his son and grandson did. He ran whorehouses. But he had a twist to it. There was an element of real estate fraud. What he would do is build a whorehouse on someone else's land and then try to appropriate it. He did this several times out in the Yukon and Alaska, so he was a wacky, dude. His father inherited those values. His father made a lot of money doing crooked things, running, not crooked like the mafia per se, but basically, corruption in government, getting contracts, twisting arms. And basically those were his values. In fact, he had a brother who was, kind of a nice guy, and he liked poetry, and he became a pilot, and he drank too much, and then he died from alcoholism. He died because he was weak. He was weak.
He also didn't go to his brother's funeral. Apparently, he went to the cinema instead.
Well, Donald Trump really cries for no one. Truly, he really has love for no one. It is really sort of extraordinary. Maybe the daughter that he sort of has a crush on, but Uh, but really, it's so profound. The other thing about his childhood is he was such a problem kid. He was completely out of control. He punched his second grade music teacher in the eye and gave him a black eye. And when asked why, he said, because he doesn't know anything about music. You know, he would throw cupcakes at birthday parties. He would throw erasers across the room. They put him in military school because he was out of control. But he was just a malignant bully, you know, from the start. You know, and everyone who knows him from like 6 on, you know, he's a bad seed. You know, he's some kind of like Damien seed.
So it's not just nurture. What you're saying is that nature dealt him a bad hand.
He dealt us a bad hand.
Well, in hindsight,
made him such a monster.
Yeah. And I suppose if one was to look at the childhoods of Hitler and associated dictators, is there a similarity? Is there like a through line with these people that their desire for power and the like is such because of what's missing in childhood?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, my agent really wanted me to write a book about that. And he's still mad at me that I didn't. Because it really is interesting to kind of look at these malignant narcissists who become dictators, right? Like a Hitler, and see, you know, what they had in common. You know, one thing I think that I was saying on our show, Shrinking Trump, about what they have in common that really scares me about the trial is people are saying, oh, the trial's going to weaken him, or the trial's going to make him stronger. Well, I think the trial is weakening him politically. It hurt his poll numbers. You know, there were 10% of the, or 2 to 8% of the population said, okay, now that's a bridge too far. I've made up my mind. But what it does with his malignant personality, he feeds on hate energy. You know, so it gives him more rage, more homicidal rage to drive him, you know, and now he wants revenge even more, you know, and he's fantasizing about it, and it's energizing him. Justin Frank, the biographer, said, you know, he came in the middle of the show and he said, look, I agree with everything you guys said, but I think you're missing something. You're underestimating something. He said, he's energized by conflict.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So there's a part of him that, you know, he's right where he wants to be, in the pit, you know, the victim, but we're going to get those bastards. And, you know, he keeps talking about revenge in these interviews. And they keep trying to give him an off ramp, like, well, but really, you're too busy on the Fox and Friends interview. And then with Dr. Phil. No. Yeah. But really, I know what you've said is the best revenge is helping the country. Right. And he said, well, I have to see, because these are bad people.
That's right.
These are really,
they're
really
sick. He says they're sick.
They're sick.
Yeah.
They're sick people. And then Dr. Phil said, but sir, you don't have time, you know, to go after these people. You know, you don't need justice. You need to make things right. You know, he says, oh, you're right, Phil. It might take a lot of time to get revenge on these people. He's like, you don't have enough time to get ready. He's like, you're right. You know, we really have to. It may take a long time, but we're going to get those bastards. Well, I think about
Sean Hannity did the same thing. Sorry to interrupt you. Sean Hannity did the same thing, trying to steer him away from the dictator for a day line, didn't he? He had him on the show and he said, you know, you said you'd be a dictator for a day. You really just meant just a day, didn't you? And he was like, well, we'll see. We'll see. And again, this is about having adults in the room to try and protect the rest of the world from Donald Trump. And it doesn't seem to be working anymore. Even people who are staunch allies like Hannity and even Dr. Phil, who's definitely nailed his colors to the mast.
No, exactly. And this also does relates to two things. One, with malignant narcissists, Eric Fromm said, they get worse and worse. They become more and more out of control, more and more extreme. Okay. But also with dementia, people become more impulsive and have poorer judgment. And even the fact that he's saying so much of this out loud, you know what I mean, isn't even wise. You know what I mean? You know, Hitler didn't announce everything he was going to do when he was running for election.
And he got elected. I mean, that's the other thing, is we have to remember that, you know, Hitler didn't take part in a coup. He got duly elected, and then what played out was not stuff that was in his manifesto promise necessarily, and the brainwashing of turning Germans into Nazis, which was a remarkable feat. And I want to talk about that with you a little bit later, this notion of brainwashing and the cult of Trump. But let's just go back to his father for a second, because we know about, him taking these tenement buildings and not wanting to rent them to black families.
Yep.
Where did the racism set in? This kind of, and also the white replacement theory, the great replacement theory, because he's into eugenics and he talks a lot about people having good genes. There's definitely a white supremacist in there as well. Did that come from his father, who was, a member of the Klan?
Well, the short answer, yes. But the other thing is, do you remember the show All in the Family?
Yes.
That's a working class white guy in Queens, where Donald Trump grew up. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's his people, right? Those are his people. I don't know what to call that type of racist. Okay. but he's a Queens racist, if nothing else. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
It's so interesting to me because, so much of his policies come down to racism and also the caste system, and there's so much there. And it's so frustrating because, he doesn't necessarily say it out loud, but the dog whistles are there. My African-American friend over here, as he said that time in front of the plane, which was just like so weird. And I keep coming back to that word weird to describe him. How many other Trumps are there in this country? Like people who suffer malignant narcissism, the personality disorder, the cold childhood. I mean, obviously people have narcissists in their family and they recognize that a lot of that behavior, or they've been married to them and split up with them. I mean, it's a very complex relationship with these types of people. Are there other Trumps, or is he a little bit like our planet? Is he a one-off, an anomaly in the solar system?
I think it's a little bit of both. He really is one in a zillion. But obviously, it's a personality type. A lot of people, talk to me and say, oh, well, I have a boss who's a narcissist, or I was married to a malignant narcissist. And, again, a lot of these things are on a spectrum, right? So people can have some degree of these traits without being a complete monster that he is, or that, let's say, a Hitler would be or was. But the other thing is that malignant narcissism is different than just narcissistic personality disorder. And it's important to understand that. And I should have explained that actually up front, so I apologize. When I was more in practice, I always used to get that in right away. It has 4 planks, basically. One is narcissism, of course. The other is what I was referring to before, antisocial personality disorder. So look, just because someone's a narcissist, like, have you read my book? That doesn't mean that I'm a crook, or that I'm breaking laws and lying to people and conning them and you know what I'm saying, and having no conscience, right, and being a criminal. Then the third component is paranoia, right? This is what animates him, right? These immigrants, they're killing our country. They're coming in. He said he saw an army of Chinese men entering the country. He said this in one of his speeches. We highlighted this on Shrinking Trump. He said, he claims to have personally witnessed it. I think it was on TV. I saw 29,000 Chinese soldiers. They marched right into the country. I mean, I don't know. They're all military age. They all they all walked in a line, and they're in the best tents with the best cell phone. So this paranoia, right? It's madness, right? But it's real for him, right? He's being victimized, right? And that's what he's tapping into with this, these white working class voters, or the sense of paranoia. And that's what he's stoking. And that's what Hitler did, right? There was no, the caravan at the border. You know what I mean? We weren't being invaded. You know what I mean? And his rhetoric about immigrants, he keeps saying like, they come up to people. They say, can I use your kitchen? Can I use your bathroom, your bedroom? And there's nothing you can say about it. And that's the good ones. It's like, and then he says, kids can't play Little League anymore. You know that? So what do you mean? Because of all the migrants that are camped out all over the fields. It's like, No, that's not happening. But you see what I mean? He's creating the sense of paranoid sense. It's like War of the Worlds. Remember that,
Yes.
that fake broadcast to let people know they're being invaded by aliens? It's like a war of, we're being invaded. We're being invaded by immigrants. No, we're not.
It's very frustrating when you kind of know something to be true and you see the opposite being said by him and then it being repeated by the media. There is a problem in this country with for-profit media that they need people like Donald Trump. Like, he is box office to them. People didn't watch these channels before Trump. They were on in gymnasiums or, nobody really kind of watched the news in the same way that they did when he showed up. And this desire to broadcast his rallies and to see what he's going to say next. It's like the Howard Stern things. And it's like, I just kept listening because I wanted to know what he was going to say next. That how much of that side of it, the media has created the monster, because he can't do it all by himself.
Well, before I answer the question, I just want to finish answering your last question, because it's the fourth plank is sadism of malignant narcissism.
I apologize. Yes.
No, don't apologize. But I just want people to understand this, because this is the real kicker, right? This is the part of him that loves to destroy, that loves to create chaos, that loves to create pain, right? He is the car accident we can't take our eyes away from. But the point is he because he loves destruction, right? He revels. Remember that scene in Apocalypse Now where he goes, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." Right. It's that level of malevolence. See, this is what makes it malevolent, which is the joy, the glee, the energy he takes in harming people, degrading people, crushing them. Right? It is actually what Eric Fromm called it was the concatenation of evil. Right? This is pure evil. This is.
Yeah, I didn't really know that it existed like that. Maybe that's my naivety, John, but obviously we meet politicians and vote for politicians that we don't particularly like or we don't trust because it's the best of a bad bunch or any of that. But what you're describing is somebody who is so inherently vile and gets off on the destruction and dissatisfaction and dispossession of others. And we don't really come into contact unless you've got a terrible neighbor or something. But, we tend not to discover people like that.
Yeah.
I would like to, I have a greater trust in humanity. What you're effectively saying is this guy is so left field, or I should probably say right field in his case, that we can't judge him by normal standards.
No, he's like sui generis. I mean, he is unique. He really is unique. He's like 10 standard deviations from the mean to the right. And so it actually is hard to comprehend. It's hard to think like him. It's hard to realize that he'll take more pleasure in destroying America than making America great.
I don't really know what to say to that. I mean, that really is the saddest part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's the worst case scenario.
Let's take a quick break, and I want to come back and talk about the media, but I also want to talk about his supporters and how they're able to ignore all of this stuff and give him their love anyway. That's next on The Weekend Show. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. I've received one of these boxes, and I can verify that the quality of the food was excellent, and it tasted delicious too.
Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend now, and listeners of this show get free bacon for a year. That's 1 year of the best bacon you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelled MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend.
We're back with Dr. John Gartner here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. So we're going to discuss two things in this final part, and that is the cult of Trump. But firstly, how the media is addicted to him, and how, as I said earlier, he can't really kind of rise as he has on his own. You know, he needs help, not just from individuals with him in his campaign. And as we know, most of his 2016 campaign people have either been prosecuted or been to prison, and even Paul Manafort, to name but one, is already being talked about as being brought back to help him with his 2024 campaign. But the media, how is it that the media has also been blindsided by him, that they can put the good of the country and the right, to one side and celebrate the rise of fascism in order to kind of support their ledger?
I've asked myself this question 1,000 times, and ultimately the conclusion that I've come to is that the vast right-wing conspiracy is winning the media war. Look at what's happened recently. If you think of this as a game of chess, I think you and I were using that analogy before. Look at the pieces the vast right-wing conspiracy has taken off the board. Twitter was the most painful one for me, since I've wasted much of my it's not my youth anymore, my age, my elderly years. Used to be the real public square. Now it's a funnel for Russian disinformation, and some of us are allowed to hang out on the square too, but most of the people have gone home. CNN was just taken over by Liberty Media. This is huge, folks. I mean, just catastrophic. We had two sort of left of center, news, cable news services that were on Earth One, that distinction of Earth One and Earth Two, Fox is versus Earth Two. Well, now CNN is in this murky, actually it's almost worse. They're masquerading as being central, but they're really being controlled now by Liberty Media. Right here in my hometown, it's tragic. The Baltimore Sun, proud local newspaper, 168 years or something old, just bought by Sinclair Media. And Sinclair Media is just a total right-wing propaganda machine. And they actually make they own tons of local news stations, but they make them read right-wing national propaganda. So this, again, they've created a system, you see, an information an infoverse where the information circulates, like in a circulatory system. We've got now Sinclair's got the local news. Now they've got Twitter. And I don't know what's happening at the New York Times and the Washington Post, but they're acting like they're somehow complicit, even though I don't see the connection. The Wall Street Journal, look at, they're owned by News Corp. When I was decrying that, and by the way, that article about Biden was so damaging. Because you know what happened? Sinclair pumped that Biden article. They pick up
on it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it got
so much journalism
is,
it's copy and paste. It's much easier to copy and paste in journalism than it is to do the work, it seems. And also the Washington Times, the Epoch Times, the New York Post, all of these publications.
But they always had those. But now I'm saying what they're doing is they're taking our institutions.
Right.
And flipping them, okay? And there's only so many of those you can flip and it not be checkmate.
People don't know, though, do they? They don't understand about media ownership. And the problem is that they end up cross-referencing. So if they see something on social media, then they go and look in the New York Post and they go, oh, well, there's the same article. It must be true. And they turn on one of the news channels, and there's at least half a dozen of these far-right news channels now masquerading as the truth, or we do it differently and all that stuff, and actually it's just the same old propaganda.
Right. And Hitler was a master of propaganda, but I mean he would bow to the propaganda machine that the right has put together. And if we go under, that will be the thing that keeps our heads under the water, because you ask the question, how can people believe this misinformation? And it's a very simple answer: repetition.
Yeah.
They just hear it enough times. I was pickleball at the senior center, a new guy comes, and just recently retired doctor, really smart guy, nice guy, liked him right away. And, somehow we started talking about Biden. He says, oh yeah, Biden's really, cognitively impaired. I said, like, do you read the Wall Street Journal? He goes, oh yeah, I always read the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, because a lot of smart, educated people read the Wall Street Journal. And of course it wasn't the first time he'd heard that, and then of course I went into my whole, and he goes, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know.
But unfortunately, people have been reading the same publications for so long before they fell into different hands. So they think it's the paper that they used to trust, and,
Right.
and things have changed. And I remember when I was
That's
living
right.
in London, I used to see, Rupert Murdoch used to go through the back door for meetings with the prime ministers. And it would be like, why does the prime minister need to meet Rupert Murdoch, the tabloid, news owner? It was remarkable. And yet it became normal. And the normalization of this, I suppose, is part of the problem too, or hyper normalization, as it might be described.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's so significant that they've been purchasing existing, it's like,
Yeah.
Truth Social, fine. That's their competing. Yeah. It's one thing to start competing with. What they do is more insidious. You're right. You trust the voice of the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times, or CNN. I think CNN is really the best example, because look, most, middle-aged people, older people, CNN, we've been watching CNN for decades. You know what I mean? So it's CNN. Only now it's CNN West, CNN East.
Yes.
It's the Russian version, CNN
Right.
Pravda.
Yeah. It's the RT of modern America. Okay, let's talk about the cult of Trump, which is a phrase coined by Dr. Steve Hassan, of course, with
Yes.
his famous book, who's been on this show a few times.
Yes.
Dr. Bandy Lee's been on this show a few times as well, and she talks, very deeply about the narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism, but also Trump contagion, where she describes it actually being an epidemic, a mental health problem for the whole country, where people have bought into the cult of Trump and can't see any way out, and that it actually could be treated en masse as a mental health pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are
It's
your
like
views
mass
on
delusion.
Right?
It's like mass delusion.
What are your
it is
views
mass
on this?
delusion. Well, it's interesting. I think that I have a very evolutionary and sort of obscure theory. It goes all the way back to chimpanzees, if you could allow me. So we used to think that humans were the only creatures that committed murder. And Jane Goodall, spent all that time living with the chimpanzees, and they were so human and touching and loving, and the relationships were so, that we just all fell in love with the chimpanzees. Well, Jane Goodall retired, and that big chimpanzee colony got kind of big, so they separated into two colonies. Well, everything we had observed so far had been within group behavior. Even the competition for the males, for dominance, no one really got hurt. It was called display behavior. They'd beat their chest, they'd pick up heavy rocks and throw them in the river to show how strong they were. You know what I mean? And someone would come out onto, maybe they'd bump up a little bit against each other a little bit, and someone would win. Okay. Then they discovered how the troops treated the other troops with between group behavior. What would happen is one dominant, hyper excited alpha male. And I do think part of Trump's appeal is his hypomania. He's charismatic. That energy is part of what energizes the crowd, right? One leader starts hitting the other males and getting them excited, so they start hooting, and then they walk over to the other troop, and in a kind of a manic sort of fugue state, they murder males that were friends of theirs just a few minutes ago, and then eventually they murder enough of them that they take over their territory and their females. And so what happens is the troop that had the murderous, charismatic, hypomanic leader was the one that survived. And I think what he's tapping into at a basic level is these whites who feel under threat, right? If you really believe that following that leader will save your troop, right? Or they'll do it to us, you'll forgive a multitude of sins. Okay. So what if he's a jerk, liar, you know what I mean? And a grifter.
So
and
what you're describing
raper.
is Planet of the Apes.
Exactly. It's exactly Planet of the Apes. And look, that great scene in Planet of the Apes, right, where they compete for who's going to be the leader. And it's the one who wins. We hope it's going to be Caesar because he's a good, he's Biden. He's a good person. But Koba is like evil, but he seems stronger. So we're really worried about how that's going to turn out. Well, I think the thing is that there's a basic instinct to follow that powerful leader. And this is where Trump projects power. Okay. And he's very good at doing it through his grandiosity, through his hypomania, but also through the way he only surrounds himself with adoring people. So you only see him with sycophants. He's only going to safe spaces. Do you realize that he has not taken one question from a journalist about the conviction? Not one question. He was on Fox and Friends for an hour and a half, and the closest they got was, well, Mr. Trump, President Trump, you've been through a trial. You've been through a lot.
Yeah.
How are you doing? So like acknowledging the trial, like you've been through the trial, but like, again, how he feels as a victim, never asking him about the charges. Not once. Dr. Phil didn't either. No. In other words, he's only, and obviously in his rallies, he's surrounded by adoring people. So of course it feeds his narcissism, but it also creates the excitement of a cult, right? It's like you're watching one of those super church services on TV. You know what I mean?
So he's made for television, isn't he? I mean, this is his experience on The Apprentice, because that was fake, as we now have discovered. For those that didn't know, he didn't choose who he fired. It was part of the show. And so he was made to look more capable. He was made to look more successful. It wasn't really his boardroom. He had better furniture than he would ever pay for. And so that facade was then used as a kind of electioneering platform, that it's that rich guy off of The Apprentice. And really that was the only success he's ever had, but it wasn't even his success. It was the network's success.
Well, he understands communication. Look, part of his success was Twitter. Before they kicked him off of Twitter, he managed to dominate every conversation. Like every hour, what Donald Trump had to say was news. And it could be Covfefe, it didn't matter what the heck it was. You know what I mean? The point is we're talking about Covfefe, right? So if we're all talking about Covfefe, we're all talking about him.
And even now, because people say to me, are you not tired of talking about him? And I'm like, no, I will not tire of it until he's dead, or even after his death, because this is the most important thing on this planet, because he's not just terrorizing the United States. The rest of the world is on high alert.
Oh my God.
It has become a serious problem for NATO allies, for European nations who rely on America, these international treaties, not to mention trade. He knows nothing about international trade. So in terms of tariffs and, he has basically turned the world on its head. And it always surprises me that it is even possible that one man can be so destructive.
I couldn't say it better. You put it very well. It's sort of breathtaking to consider that one personality disordered, demented man could essentially turn the world upside down. But that is potentially what we see happening here.
Let's talk to the people that support him. I refer to them as turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, because there's nothing in Donald Trump's policies that would benefit the white working classes of America. There's other than that kind of check which was a rebate that he sent out early on in his presidency, which had his signature on it, which was entirely unethical, where people were like, oh, I got $1,000. He's just handing out money. I mean, that was like an early bribe. But beyond that, nothing. Like he hasn't offered any policies that would benefit the people that give him every dime that they have spare, and they're the ones who are buying his stock in Truth Social. They're the ones who are sending $5, $10, $20 when he begs on social media. They're the ones flying from rally to rally, or driving, or with the Trump paraphernalia, buying the hats and the merchandise.
Yeah.
And yet, and the trading cards, let's not forget the trading cards. And yet he doesn't give a flying monkeys about any of these people. And so I suppose that's where this contagion, this mental health epidemic comes in, is because they're voting for the wrong team. You know, these people would benefit so much more from putting a check in the Democrat box.
No, your turkey analogy is perfect, because the Democrats are the ones that want to provide services. And essentially what these people, look, they're oligarchs who just want to rob the country. You know, you mentioned that, program, that rebate program where they got the $1,000 check from Donald Trump. Well, all these businesses got like $100 million, emergency loans they never had to pay back. And, it's like, I got offered a $50,000 loan. Like, people saying, everyone I knew were taking the loans, and, and now then I don't know how many paid them back, but it was like pigs to the trough. He just opened the treasury.
Including lawmakers as well.
Oh yeah. Everybody chowed down, and a few morsels, went to the poor people. But meanwhile, we doubled the national debt and accomplished what? Absolutely nothing. We just gave away a lot of money. So that was a horribly, fiscally, a horribly destructive thing. But again, he actually wants to destroy everything.
Because he hates it, because he has contempt for the institutions, for the fact that he has to pay tax, the fact that the judiciary is trying to, hold him to account. Is that the reason? Is it retribution?
It's all of those things, and it just feels so good. He loves it.
We forget that, don't we?
The sadism, right? We forget the sadism. Sadism is sexualized, It's like, a day when you get to really, hurt somebody, that just a day where you don't get to hurt someone. It's like a day without sunshine,
I apologize for not having any empathy for sadism, but it's something that maybe we really forget, that if we judge him by normal standards, we'd be like, well, surely he wouldn't do this. But what you're saying is, of course he will, because he loves it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's hard for us to comprehend because we're not evil enough to understand evil.
I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, going back to what you said at the very beginning of this conversation, that it's actually much simpler than people make it. That, really he is an open book and just a really bad person.
He's almost like a cartoon villain. It's almost like he's the Joker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've said that before. It's funny you say that. Yeah. He's all of the
pleasure in bringing down Gotham City. Everyone in Gotham City will die.
Right. Right. He's all of the baddies in the Batman comics. He's the Penguin and the Riddler and all of these characters.
He really is. He is. He actually is. This is that is art imitating life in this case.
So if we can offer advice, and I know it's difficult because, I don't want people to watch this and be like, yeah, okay, well, we know that he's a nightmare, but what can we do about it? What can we do about it, Doctor? Because people's families have been broken up. People have fallen out with friends. It has had a huge kind of social effect as well by nature of the cultural tribalism. And it's really pitted people against each other. Sure. And that's yeah. So how can we overcome that? And how can we maybe help each other or even try and bring people back from the brink?
I have a very simple answer. We have to win. It's just that simple. How did we wake people up from Nazism? We won World War II. We have to win this election. and that will break the spell to some extent. Of course, all these right-wing organs will still be there. They'll still be churning out some new conspiracy. I don't know, Biden will be putting broccoli in the water. I don't know what the hell, but they're going to make you eat broccoli, but
you just can't cook it because you haven't got a gas stove. But
the point
that
is
important.
Cut it off at the head is what I'm saying. When Donald Trump is deposed, when he finally goes to trial, when he goes to jail, okay, that's when the spell will have to break at some level, but it can't break until that happens.
Dr. Bandy Lee has a theory from the work that she does in prisons. She says when the gang leader is removed, the supporters tend to default back to their pre-gang position. Is that something you recognize?
Well, yes, because look, America didn't used to be this country, there's all this intimidation now, intimidating jurors, intimidating witnesses, intimidating election workers who just, moved the boxes and did their job, intimidation against people like me. I've been spammed with bad reviews on my Google page, that have hurt my practice. So if anyone want to put good reviews, I realize I need to go back up, but, but looking for ways to retire. And I've doctors who previously were active in this movement, who I asked to speak up, be on the show, or said, look, I'm taking a step back. I've been getting too much flack, or I think I might lose patience, or my promotion was held up at my medical school because of my activism. People are scared in a way they weren't scared before because there's a level of bullying now, right, that's being unleashed. Okay. And so I think, actually, I forget what your original question was, why I was talking about this. What was
Well, we're talking about how we kind of extract people from the cult and give, to kind of get through this period because it's breaking up families. I mean, I have a theory. Let me just place my theory and see what you think. And that is that Donald Trump can't win the election because he is not popular. And the reason I say that is because there is no evidence of his popularity, not since 2016, when Russia helped him win the election and James Comey made that speech a week before the vote about Hillary Clinton. That was a perfect storm, in my opinion, that enabled Donald Trump to get elected.
Right.
But actually, he does not have mass appeal or mass support. He pays for people to show up at these events to kind of have interactions with. We've seen it in Chick-fil-A and various places. None of it is real. The whole thing is a production with him. He doesn't walk out until everyone's in place so that the cheers can happen. And as you say, he doesn't take questions from what he considers to be unfriendly media or hard questions, as he said that time on 60 Minutes. Why did you give Biden easy questions? Like talking like a child. So my theory is that actually the whole thing, a lot of it is in our minds. The whole concept that Trump is a threat this time around. He wasn't in 2020. He wasn't in the midterms, or certainly his candidates weren't. Yeah. And in 2024, it's all bluster, all of it.
I think you make a very good point. And statistically, right, I think we're being gaslit again by this, the media. These polls just don't add up for me. And the methodology is so ridiculous. It's clearly skewed towards a certain population that would tend to skew more towards the conservative who would ever answer a poll. Young people don't answer polls. But also there just seems to be this kind of attempt from all these different places to make Trump look stronger than he is. And the problem is that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, because if we create this image of Trump being strong, remember the chimpanzees. Remember Planet of the Apes. There's a low information voter that's going to make a decision as to just who seems stronger.
And they want to back a winner. People don't want to back a loser.
Exactly. And so, I think this is an interesting statistic. So they queried Haley voters, right? Are you going to vote? Obviously, they can't vote for Haley now in the general election. Are you going to vote for Trump? Are you going to vote for Biden? About half of them said they're going to vote for Biden. Makes sense if you believe in what Haley said she was saying. But about half of them said they're going to vote for Trump. And when they said why, one of their main reasons was, well, he just seems like a strong leader.
Yeah.
So all of this bullshit, okay, with, the adoring rallies, the fawning interviews, is working, is what I'm trying to say. It's making him look strong, which I think then can close the gap. All right. Because at the bottom line is, yeah, people don't like him, but there is a gut level decision about who's stronger that will have it almost always tends to break that way. You know what I mean? It's like the taller candidate usually wins. It's like just crazy stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's a very
it's quite phallic. It's quite phallic, isn't it? It goes back to that kind of male need for size and scale and strength.
Yeah, it's very, very primitive. And so Trump taps into that very, very primitive. And that's one of the reasons that I keep emphasizing his dementia. Okay. If I would love it if on my tombstone they write the word Toto. I will know my life has been a success, because in The Wizard of Oz, the wizard is on this big screen. He's going, I'm powerful. Okay. And then Toto pulls back this curtain.
Pulls the curtain. Yeah.
Pulls the curtain. And there's this fat guy behind the controls. He says, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, I'm saying pay attention to the man behind the curtain because he can't put two sentences together. He doesn't know who's president. How can he be president?
It is remarkable. And it's remarkable that we're even having to have this conversation, and that we're still having this conversation 8 years after he first showed up and started causing trouble and turning America upside down. Finally, if he loses, as per my prediction, but, I don't want to tempt fate, he's not going to accept that he lost the election, is he? So are we then going to get into the same cycle? Will the narcissist ever cease and desist, or is this just the noise is going to keep happening?
Well, it's a good question. I could see him, sponsoring the militias to, be terrorist cells or something. I think this is the main thing is he has to lose. And, one thing that is very heartening is every time we actually have an election, the Democrats overperform. Right. So there was going to be a red wave, but it ended up being a blue wave, and it's always so painful. Like we miss having, Congress by 2 seats or because something fucked up. And it's like, but we've had all these special elections. And actually, there's been a trend for Republicans to get thrown out, incumbents even in these special elections, or they're the incumbent party, let's say, that they've had this dog catcher seat, for 20, 30 years. And now the Democrat won. So I think that the voters who are going to be our last line of defense. They are the free safeties for the apocalypse. I think the voters actually have shown themselves to behave more the way you would think the voters would behave, which is to reward sanity and not reward criminality and pathological lying.
I pray that you're right. And I have great faith in the American people to do the right thing. We have to finish, but for now, Dr. John Gartner, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. See more from me on the 5 Minute News channel, and join me next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.